Hi everyone, it's Garry Kasparov and Nigel Short. We're back at it over the board to play in a 10-game series over 2 days, April 25th and 26th of 2015. This was a chess exhibition pegged as the first Battle of the Legends, and it was put on by the St. Louis Chess Club and Scholastic Center. St. Louis is the chess capital of the United States. Both Kasparov and Short were essentially rekindling their match from 22 years ago, where they competed in the 1993 World Chess Championship match. In this Battle of the Legends, they played 5 games on each day consisting of 1 rapid time control game, 25 minutes, 10-second increment, and 4 Blitz games with time control, 5 minutes, and a 3-second increment. I'll be showing all 10 games in this one video and providing some very brief commentary along the way. Additionally, on the right-hand side, you'll notice I've popped up the Stockfish engine, so it gives you a little bit of an idea as to how the evaluation is shifting from move to move as I go through each of these 10 games. So let's hop right to it and see let's see what went on in this Battle of the Legends. We have on day 1, game 1, the rapid time control game, Kasparov on the white end, kicking off with d4, Short replying with e6, knight f3, knight f6. We soon turn into a Bogo Indian defense with bishop b4. On knight b to d2, we have what's known as the Grunfeld variation. Black is striking at the white center. We're soon to have now this minor piece imbalance, knight for bishop exchange. Black taking, opening up the position, getting on with some developing moves, striking in the center. The queen is there to recapture, exerting some pressure on g2. This makes life a little bit difficult for white to complete kingside development. So white seeks a queen exchange, but black is not so quick to do so, retreating and maintaining pressure. So f3 is on board, a step in the direction to develop the bishop. The knight's kicked, e5, freeing the bishop. And now we have e4. These next few moves, e4, soon we're going to have both queen and bishop moving next, and this is to anticipate an eventual knight move into that b3 square, certainly a soft point on the white queen side. So e4, knight d7, queen f2, not yet doing anything with the light square bishop. Knight c5, bishop e3, the knight lands in there, but the rook not so inconvenienced. He wanted to go to d1 anyway. This is an open file. So we have both light square bishops coming out, neither side with an advantage time-wise, development-wise. And the main imbalance here is that white has the bishop pair, this X-factor bishop. So how to put him to use, how to show his power on board. Black regroups the knight, or repositions the knight, so that this f6 move can be played to reinforce e5. Kasparov puts some pressure on e5 right away. It's supported, but now looking to break open the position, cracking at that dark square e5. Knight d4, bishop h5, maintaining the bishops. The rook is hit, but it's simply ignored. Smashing through on e5, allowing this exchange sacrifice. Bishop takes rook, rook takes bishop, and you cannot recapture on e5. This is getting broken down very fast. All white pieces are functioning quite well. Do not forget about the knight, soon to pounce on the position by way of d5. There is no time to recapture. This queen is excellent. This knight is hit. The bishop's hit. There's checking ideas, and there's even back rank mate ideas once the king is in the corner. Should the knight play like this, just getting out of the way? Well, here comes this final piece. This is deadly, as you're seeing the evaluation is +9 and climbing. Deadly fork, coupled with this idea of rook f8, that's going to be game over. Cannot take here. What's tried is king h8, and now knight d5, giving the exchange back is black. Queen f2 exerting pressure on the knight. A better continuation would have been queen to h4 with this in mind, exploiting the pin against the king. Instead, the knight centers himself up, the exchange is given back, and now we have black basically crawling into a ball, just barely getting back for defense. Bishop h6 threatening a mate in 2 now with queen takes pawn and then mate. The knight hurries back to block, and we have the bishop pair versus a sad knight and a rook that is yet to contribute. He's getting into play now. White is regrouping a little bit. A little bit of a, slight edge for white here. An idea would be bishop to d2 to c3 to consolidate, as was mentioned by Kasparov after this game, or after day one's games, just to consolidate, get the bishops on nice squares here, and this king is going to be in some big trouble, and it's much easier to play on the white side, being really well coordinated. But instead, bishop e4, rook e8, still maintaining pressure on the knight, maintaining this knight in a pin. b4, offer of the queen exchange, that's avoided. Rook takes bishop, and we end up having, with this first game, a perpetual check. Bishop takes, queen takes, and now this queen bounces back and forth on these two squares here, d8 and f6, and these two players agree to a draw. There's no way to avoid the perpetual check. This was game one of day one, and the only draw of the entire 10 games, which is really something. So let's dive right in and see this first now Blitz game, game 2 of day 1. We have short on the white end, kicking off with c4. We see in this one the English opening, what's known as the ultra-symmetrical variation, copycat variation if you would like to view it like that. But we quickly have an imbalance struck in this position right away. This is an interesting knight maneuver, looking to prevent this d5 advance. Let's see how black deals with that. h4, h6 on board, so as to meet h5 with g5, giving the knight a kick. Queen d2, this is preparing b3 and bishop to b2, finishing some development, but this is where black strikes right away. b5, pawn sacrifice, takes, white's up a pawn, but now this d5 move is on board. So this idea, the time spent with this knight maneuver into that f4 square, while black is finding a way to give up some material just to get this pawn advance in. A very nice center, a knight that is now going to be struck at right away. Bishop a6. Series of captures. The light square bishops are now going to be exchanged. White needs to be a little bit careful of their light squares. Possibilities for a knight jumping into f3 at some stage. There is no light square bishop that black has, but the queen can certainly function on this diagonal at some stage. This is a weak pawn, but white is holding. It's as you could see, evaluation-wise, it's about an equal position. But this is going to be a really strong knight at some stage, jumping into that d4 point. f5 on board. f4, very weakening, but still a close call here in this game 2, first Blitz game. Knight centers up. Takes. Rook is getting active on the black side. And we have this doubling up, looking for quite possibly h5, undermining this structure. Rook e3. It's hard to pick a better square for that rook. He's no longer just a piece functioning along a file, but here comes some rank pressure on g3. This knight is, he can't move now. g3 would drop. Rook f3, trying to neutralize that rook's pressure along the rank. And just doubling up is black. Knight f4, queen b7, defending now against f3, queen a6. I didn't see it at the moment, or at the time this game was being played. I was thinking more just queen a6 to try and pick up that pawn, but there's also this idea to have an eye on that g6 square, as we'll see. b3, the queen's there to defend. Bishop e5, h5, bishop takes, and now this intermediate recapture, instead of taking the bishop right here, this capture here is going to be the game loser. After pawn takes, we have the queen recapturing. You can't recapture like this because if rook takes g3, there goes your queen. And after pawn takes, what's going to happen? Well, the move played in the game, queen h5. Big trouble. Rook g8 right around the corner. Rook takes, pawn takes. This is now a passed pawn. Two connected passed pawns, usually really good, but they're a long way off from posing any threat at all. This guy is going to be deadly. Queen h2, just getting out of this pin idea. King h1 and now e2, and that is game over. As you see on the right-hand side, it's already calling for a mate in 3. What's the rook do? You go here, queen f3, queen g2 next, and, well, where else are you going to go? Pawn takes rook, promoting to a queen. It's just deadly. Here, promotion. There's no save at this point. So Kasparov going up here now, 1.5 to half. Let's see what happened in game 2, or I should say game 3, Blitz game number 2, where we have Kasparov on the white end. He's opening up with the e4, and we see now the Nimzovich defense. Some interesting openings. We have a really good blend in these 10 games. Really great variety of different openings being played. So in this one, it's the Nimzovich defense. Let's see how this one plays out. Always a little bit awkward to obstruct that c-pawn. Runs into this tempo gaining move, but that's what black is baiting white to do, just to make these guys flinch. They're quite often best placed sitting like this, but as soon as one moves forward, there's a little bit of a gap in the position, the e5 square in particular. This does happen. d5, the knight returns home. Bishop e2, just getting some developing moves in here. Trying to grab some queenside space is white. And now welcoming this exchange here. It is still a bit of a closed position. Black has some nice control over these dark squares. And we have c6, a5, a6. The first square that pops up is b6. That's a weak square. And something that white focuses in on. We have the bishop, soon the knight looking to jump into that square. Black develops a piece, bishop d4, just getting some more pieces involved, all pieces involved, and here comes the knight. Knight b6 right around the corner, e5. The bishop for knight exchange, the rook is hit. This knight can soon be challenged with the knight on d7, but we have a nice little rook lift, looking to reinforce the knight. Knight d7, rook b3, quite timely. Striking now in the center is black. This is weakening the light squares. If there's ever a capture or push, there's maybe ideas of getting the bishop in here. Don't know how dangerous that would be with the position simplifying quite a bit more. Not as many minor pieces on board. More of a heavy piece ending. Knights are exchanged. Getting the queen involved now. c5. Rook to b6. We saw this in the previous game. Kasparov's rook coming down here, functioning no longer on the... not just on the file, but the rank. Similar story here. There's some pressure on the weak point d6. So let's see how this plays out. First c4. We have a queenside break now with b4. All rooks here trained now on the b file. Rook takes a5, queen b1, stopping any rook check. If you go right in for this, there's here, and king h2 you could block. King h2, this might be a bit of an annoying idea to give that king another check. This is stopped altogether. Queen b1, queen d8. Rook takes pawn, queen f6, so this is threatening a capture and maybe smashing through on this square if this queen is no longer around to watch over e4. Rook is there to defend a little bit. Black's getting active with their rook. There might be some sacrifices here against the white king side. c5, d takes c. The rooks are exchanged. After king h8, we have the move queen c2, but before this move was played in the game, Kasparov ran out of time. He played the move queen c2, and it was at that point that Nigel then pointed to his clock. Kasparov was down on time and lost this third game of 10. He was in the driver's seat, clearly, but he lost track of time. He's been out of it for a little bit, and he lost track of time on this one. This is now a score of 1.5 each, so it's split at this point. Let's have a look at this next game, game 4. Game 4 from day 1. Short now on the white end. b3. I was not lying when I said that we had quite a bit of a mix. The Nimzovich-Larsen attack, b3 system, okay. So let's see how this plays out. White goes with a double fianchetto system. White sets up a nice, or black sets up a nice pawn center. e3, knight c6, exchanging some knights soon. We actually have a damaged structure now after d4. These pieces are off, the light square bishop in particular, and white needs to take some care over their light squares as a result of this. These two can be, without question, a long-term disadvantage for sure, these double isolated pawns. We have as a follow-up d3 and then queen to d7. This is already a super important point in the game. What ends up happening after queen d7 and then queen to e2, black takes on e3, and this is, as it turns out, just a very poor structure for white. These guys are doubled and isolated, but the amount of pressure that black is able to exert on this white d3 pawn, and also this idea of launching the h-pawn, as you'll soon see, white is the side who's really crawling up into a ball, and it's just not a fun position to play. Black maybe could have even done one move better by capturing first on e3 prior to a queen move. After queen to d7, white should consider capturing like this just to mask this pawn. In other words, not allow this heavy piece pressure against the d3 pawn, or even consider e4 to close it up a little bit. This would allow still some play on the black side with that queen pawn, playing a5, a4, and then there will be some target on the queen side of the board, but it's hard to imagine that the white position would collapse like it did in this game. We had queen e2, d takes e, f takes, and now just getting some pressure on d3, having to go completely defensive. And now in comes h5, h4, striking at these two pawns. It's a very weak king position, robbed of the light square bishop, robbed of the f-pawn, and a lot of gaps in the white position, f3 and h3 in particular. Knight c3, finishing development, but here comes now knight g4, improving the knight position, opening up the bishop's diagonal, and immediately there is the threat of knight takes e3 with bishop d4 to follow, and there goes the queen. So white exchanged dark square bishops, pressure now on e3, having to babysit another pawn, rook e1, h4 on board, just breaking open the position for what exactly? Well, in comes now king g7. Don't forget about this rook, soon to enter the position. In fact, both rooks soon to enter along the h-file. Queen g2, really just trying to defend. There's not much that you could do. There's not a great active plan here for the white side. Simple idea, double rooks, smash through here, smash through there. And what do? It's a completely naked king here. There's no good defense. h3, the knight is kicked. It's not much of an inconvenience. He's really well central. He's now within checking distance. And there's even ideas right now to capture on this square at some stage with knight f3 to follow, but we just have a little bit of a build-up. Rook dh8, d4, the knight returns, ready to get into this square next. This pawn will fall soon and is hit a ton of times. h3 will then be hit a ton of times. Knight d3, knight f2, defending. Here comes another piece, offering a queen exchange, trying to alleviate the pressure, but we have this intermediate check, king f1, really ugly looking pawns, right? But this king is still going to be under some heavy fire. King e2, rook h2, the knight's in a pin, avoiding the rook exchange, looking for this move next, and this is a game over move next right here. Knight g4, you can't do anything about that. These threats here, rook takes e3, rook takes f2, this is completely collapsing. Rook takes e3, rook e4, this knight is still pinned. rook takes, giving up the exchange, but there's nothing to do here. This knight is now in a pin, and after e5, Nigel, he just throws in the towel at this point. It's at, 2.5 to 1.5 at this stage. They have one more game to play in day one. Let's see what happened in this final game of day one here. Their fourth Blitz game, where Kasparov finishes up day one with the white pieces. He opens up with d4. What do we have in this game? The Chigorin defense. Okay. This was an interesting battle. We have a really quick imbalance, the knight for bishop exchange, and a messed up pawn structure here, doubled f pawns. e3. Queen is hit, the knight is pinned, that's broken. Bishop pair versus the knights. Ideally, black would like to have the position closed. Let's see if he manages. Queen b1 with an eye on b7 and also a checking square on f5 for when black castles. Now this was a really interesting idea. f4, and after takes, to give this check and then recapture. The queens are off board. Knight f6, the bishop pair versus the knights. Can the position get opened up more? We're going to see that. f5, it's defended, and here we go. It's in fact black who's opening up the position, trying to exploit these two pieces, two bishops that are unprotected. He does win a pawn, but it's only temporarily. After the rook recaptures, the center is completely liquidated, and here's the dark square bishop skewering the rook, the pawn, and soon to hit the rook in the corner. Rook to e8, rook d1. This is just a fantastic position for the black side. The king is fine over here on g3, not accessible. The knights are of no bother to the white side. We have now rook d6, pressure on this knight here. And now we have rook takes knight. Not the best move. Computer suggests rook to d7, maintaining the rook. Pressure on b7, pressure on f7. Following up, we did have rook takes knight. If the rook is captured immediately, we have this idea in mind. But in response, Short is able to first do what? Take out the bishop, and then after the recapture, take the rook. So this is an equal position. These pawns are close to producing a passed pawn. This is a 2-to-1 majority with regard to the E and F files alone here. This last move is cutting the king off. He's not easy. He won't be able to easily approach these pawns here and help out. So let's see how this plays out. Rook takes. The king is now moving up the board. The pawns are set into motion, avoiding the rook exchange, keeping a close eye on a7, h4, preserving that pawn. And these guys get marching. Black has to be very accurate. King is improving a little bit here. Black is up a pawn, but this is a very dangerous pawn, just a couple steps away. Rook d1, king f6. A little check is thrown in. Here comes the black king, closer to now helping out escort these two passed pawns. They are split, but they're both passed. Rook d7, a4. It's a race. It's a big race. King e6, knight f6. There to defend e7 now. Black gives up that pawn, or that knight for the pawn, the very dangerous pawn. And there's ways that black can actually draw this, as we will see. Rook c8, rook d3. We have this point right here after rook a7, h4. Again, recognizing the time situation, not a lot of time to be doing this type of calculation, but black had this move, rook takes bishop, and after king takes, to push forward, and this will turn out to be a draw. Just rook c7, c3, and the timing is just right, but there's a lot of calculation that goes into that. If I'm to play out just a little bit more, king b3, I'm not sure what's even considered best at this point. The computer suggests rook b2, king a2, rook g1, king b2. This will turn out to be a draw. King f8, c2, king g7. You could promote, and the timing is just going to be right. for both sides here. They both queen at the same time. That's a very deep calculation to run with at this point, seeing that this does in fact work out. Was not played. Instead, rook d7, offering a rook exchange. These pawns get moving a little bit. White is hunting down this pawn, and he's very close to queening. c3, pawn is taken. Black king is improving. And after king b3, notice the evaluation. It's tipping in white's favor quite a bit, but this is actually not accurate. The Stockfish engine, it's a bit misleading here. The Stockfish engine is not recognizing yet that this is in fact a completely equal position. After king takes rook, that's a losing move. c2. Better would have been to simply promote right away. After rook takes queen, king takes rook, promote, push, and this is going to be a draw. Cannot push through successfully, and now the computer finally recognizes that this is completely equal. Can't do anything. King f7. The big problem is this idea of stalemate. You could do this sort of stuff just to show really quick here. King just keeps coming over like this. The queen is getting closer. You could give a check. You could go here. That's the main idea. On queen takes pawn, this is stalemate. But this was missed. a1 was not played, surprisingly enough. Instead, it was c2. White promotes, black promotes, and now we have check, another check. Queens are exchanged, and it's at this point that short resigns again. After king takes queen, there goes the pawn, and that's game over. So not a great end to day one for sure. There was this, seemed pretty straightforward, but then again, I'm not the one playing over the board. There's not that type of stress that I have, or the clock situation, none of that. So, but yeah, it was this move first, and then push through, and it's going to be a draw. So that was the end of day one. Day one finishing up 3.5 to 1.5. What would day two bring? Let's see. Day two started out the same way as day one, with the rapid time control game. Short on the white end in this one, e4. And we see with this the Sicilian Najdorf. An open Sicilian Najdorf with a6. And we have g3, e5. These were my two, well, this game here was probably my favorite of these 10 games. Certainly a much higher quality, that's for sure. And, there is more time, so it's to be expected, but a really interesting fight in this one. The big point of emphasis in this game is the d5 square. This is the weakest square in the black position, and we see white eventually maneuvering to get into that point, getting all the pieces active, half open file, preparing to castle, bishop e7. Black, however, does not castle in this game, keeping the rook on h8 and looking to break open the h file. Knight continues on this little journey to go where exactly, e3, and then d5 or f5. h4, knight e3. g6 just keeps that knight out. And now rook to e2. What's the idea behind rook to e2? White would really like to play this move here, and at the end of all of these exchanges recapture with the queen, but that would drop c2. So rook to e2 is going to defend this so that this move is now back on. And it's very important for black to now be timely, and he goes in for this exchange sacrifice. It is the top move being suggested by the computer. It was in fact the move played. H takes g, and then with this idea, rook takes c3, exchange sacrifice, wrecking the white queenside structure, and it's not just the exchange. Black also scoops up a pawn, a very significant pawn, a central pawn. So black with a 2-0 majority in the center. Not so healthy pawn structure over here for the white end. Let's see how this one plays out. Bishop b2. Not the happiest move in the world to have to play, devoting a piece to defending that weak pawn on c3. Knight f6, c4, looking to jump into that d5 square. Queen c8 has some ideas along the c file and maybe ideas connected with that h3 square. In the game, we have knight g5, and we have some coordination happening on that h3 square. Knight d5, knight takes, pawn takes. In comes knight g5. Computer does like the white side here, about a pawn and then some advantage, something about a pawn advantage. c4, a5, looking to get this bishop here. This is a really well defended point on d5, so the bishop's looking to finally have some pressure on the white position. Putting pressure on c4, well, at least a piece will then be inconvenienced on the white side. The queen or a rook will have to watch over that point. Rook c1, bishop a6, queen g4, just getting very active. Staying coordinated now, the rooks are defended. The bishop is returning. There's not going to be a way to crash through on c4. The bishop's looking to reroute. The other idea is that white is ready to take this pawn. Black sees this and doesn't want to have to then be reacting at that stage. So it's a preemptive move. Bishop c8, not allowing that eventual tempo against the bishop. Bishop c8 on board. And now f4, really looking to blast open the position, hitting the knight, crashing through on e5. Potential pins along the e file. There's already an immediate pin against this rook on h8. Following up, knight h3, he cannot be taken. Bishop takes, rook takes, and this is going to be game over. Pawn takes here. There's no longer this pin. This is crashing through. You need this guy around to watch over your light squares. King f1, f6, just reinforcing that e5 point, not allowing this bishop to break through so easily. Offering the queen exchange, it's avoided. Rook e4, king f7. Queen exchange being offered now by black. Queens are off. And after d takes e, this is now opening up a new diagonal for the bishop. So still we have, material-wise, white is the better side, but the quality of the piece is the bishop pair. This knight and rook. Let's see what white can do with this one. Rook h4. This is apparently a slip. Not much time, keep in mind. I don't know how accurate the times are. It does give us some idea as to where they were in the game, time-wise, but did not like this move here, short at about, under a minute. Rook h4 gives something away here. This is not a good structural change. This pawn is a little bit more away from the center, and this makes these moves maybe a bit more effective. These are now what we can say two connected pass pawns, with this pawn no longer being on the g3 square. So knight f4, repositioning with tempo, and it's very interesting to see how these pieces really coordinate just in an amazing way. They just are inconveniencing the rook. How does he even get active? d6, bishop gives a check. Now all of a sudden white's in a pin. Black can pick up the exchange, but what a cool move this is. I'm not taking your rook. I'm hunting down this pawn. I'm going to have a passed a pawn. Black is saying essentially, I would prefer the bishop pair than to give up or to get the exchange back. Just hammering away at a4. a4 drops with check. The other pawn falls, and this is just completely collapsing. Here comes the e pawn, the f pawn, a sad state for the bishop. He's now in the corner. He's basically not even on the board, not doing anything. Bishop d1, rook d2. Eventually, white gives the exchange back, but there's just way too many pawns here. a4, b5, simplifying even more. 4 pawns, 3 pawns to 1, and there's just nothing to do at this point. Short ends up resigning this game as well. So, real mountain to climb, not looking very good at all. Let's see what these last 4 games bring. 4 Blitz games, where we have Kasparov on the white end in this one. He opens up with d4. Knight f6. What was the opening we saw on this one? This was considered the accelerated Queen's Indian. A very quick b6. Not playing, let's say, e6 first, but instead b6. We have f3. Looking to just build in the center with e4. Knight c3, e5. White has the space. I found this quite interesting, not playing that e4 move so quickly. Instead, e3. Seems a bit awkward to do it like that, right? You have f3, you would think, well, you're doing that to get e4 in, but what's the idea behind this is to keep some control over these dark squares, anticipating that this knight, well, maybe one day he wants to jump into f4. That's not going to be allowed. So just watching over some squares here, offsetting the e5 pawn, one might view it as that. c6, striking at d5, knight h3. Now e4 comes on board, only after this bishop has put some more pressure on that point. A pawn was being threatened here. It's hit a bunch of times, both knights, pawn, and bishop. Another defender is needed, so only at that point is e4 being played. Knight g6, bishop e3. Dark square bishops are exchanged, and now with d6, this board is really cut right in half. This bishop is a very sad piece, just staring at the pawn, and this pawn is quite weak. Black castles, queen d2, b3, not just there to reinforce c4, it's paving the way for knight a4 to hunt down that c5 pawn, a pawn that's very difficult to defend. I mean, what do you do if both the knight and queen put pressure on that? He can easily fall. Queen a3, knight a4. What might be better than queen to a3? Computer suggests rook f to e8. I believe this move can still be played. Queen takes d2, king takes. Okay, there would then be rook to e6, scooping up that pawn. Instead, it was queen a3, knight a4, offering a queen exchange. This does happen. The queens are now off the board. C takes b. This allows c5. Tremendous space advantage here with these pawns, and they're ideally placed, fixed on dark squares, complementing that light square bishop quite well. And there's now a nice square for the light square bishop. Knight jumps into e6. This is the most vulnerable point, most vulnerable square on the white side, but you know, my feeling with this is that with these pawns so far advanced, there's already ideas of giving up the exchange if this knight somehow becomes intolerable in the game. It's not necessary to do something like that, but just seeing the closed nature of the position, giving up an exchange, a rook for a knight, this really bad bishop. If this pawn is ever being pushed with ideas of bishop a6, exchanging light square bishops, that would weaken the b6 square. It's just a very closed position. This is the only square that black has. The only positive feature in the black position is that d4 square, but it's never really going to be enough. Knight f2 is reminding black that this pawn is weak. Knight d3, how are you even defending e5? a5, rook c1, here comes knight f4. This knight has had an interesting journey. He's now recycling all the way back to g6 to babysit that e5 pawn. It's just not looking good at all. Light square bishops are exchanged. Knight e3, h4, and these guys end up getting crushed. This is a tremendous space advantage. I can't speak highly enough, or I can't speak enough about this space advantage that white has on the queen side. Knight b6, putting pressure on that pawn. Black pieces are going to be tied down. It's just not a happy position at all for the black side. f4, grabbing some more space, playing on both sides now is white, and after f5, this knight is completely dead. These two pawns here, and well, one might consider this pawn here is contributing to killing this knight. This pawn could never move due to this pawn. He can never go here or here because of this guy, and if he ever goes here, so what? Where is he going next? Here? He can't. It's a completely locked out knight. He's in the corner. He's dead. It's just an absolutely crushing position. The whole board is being controlled by the white side. Knight f7, rook f3. Let's see how this plays out. The knight is entering the position, and I really do mean the whole board is being made use of. Rook a1, doing what exactly? a3 on board next. Breaking on the queen side a little bit, but white is not going to budge with this pawn here. King here is played just to prevent this eventual pawn advance. For example, at this point, after here, if you're just making a dummy move, after this capture, the recapture, this pawn can start to move. So it's just a slow improving king position improvement here, king d3. If black is taking at this stage, you simply recapture, and now there's no e4. In fact, there's just now a nice square for the f2 knight. So instead, king g7, very difficult to recommend anything here for the black side. Rook b7, the a file is now going to be opened up. The evaluation is climbing in white's favor. Look at the king positions. If you compare king positions, this knight is still dead. This is the only active piece, but he's under control. He's not of any threat to the white side. Following up, black is preparing an exchange sacrifice, but it's not going to be enough. White just neutralizes the most active piece, rook d3. There go the rooks. And simply defend this pawn. He remains dead, and now white can improve their king position, and there's absolutely nothing that black can do to stop that. In fact, after king to c5, it's at that point that black resigns. There's nothing to do. Great control over this one. Big squeeze in the center. Queen side of the board, I should say, first. Nice play with establishing this pawn on f5, and then play over here again, opening up the a file. There was nothing that black could do. He resigned in this position here after king c5. How might it play out? Computer, first off, was just suggesting knight takes f5, so that's how bad this position is. If knight g4, there's b5, there's rook f3, keeping him under control. And ideas like rook a3, a8, and then d8. Let me show just something like this. I don't know what to suggest for black, but just to show the idea on the white side. Rook here, how do you defend the pawn? You could play here, but now the king is overloaded, having to watch over both knight and pawn. Knight takes pawn, and white is smashing through. Knight here next, so it's just a hopeless position here for black. And with that, after game 7, it's 5.5 to 1.5. In fact, after this game here, it's already locked up. There's no way that short could win, so these 3 games still were played out. Let's see how this finishes up. We have short in this 8th game now. He's playing on the white side. Game opens up with e4. We have a Sicilian, an open Sicilian, with a slightly awkward move order here, playing to e2, but okay. Eventually the knight gets into that d4 square, recapturing. We have this Richter-Rauser attack with bishop g5, queen d2, just getting some developing moves in here, h4, king b1, some natural stuff, but now f4, that's quite interesting, right? Give up that bishop. He's not taken, instead black is developing. Taking allows the recapture, the knight is hit, and soon that queen could shift over to the a file. That could be big problems for the black side. Evaluation is already in favor of the white side here. So not taking on this square, instead developing. More pieces need to get involved. Dark square bishop is now, well, this is the X-factor bishop. Unopposed dark square bishop. We have e5, breaking open the position. Black is fully developed. This is an interesting point in the game. e5 hits the bishop on pawn takes, the move played in the game. It does drop the bishop, but apparently this has all been worked out by Kasparov. He did the calculations and did them well. Queen takes bishop, e4, unmasking that bishop. He will not be denied sight of this queen side, the knight, the b2 pawn. Knight e5, trying to block that bishop. Well, we have bishop takes knight, pawn takes, rook a to d8. Another piece or pawn is taken. Queen takes b, rook takes. The knight is having to recapture. Now this allows for queen e1. Talk about a super active piece, threatening mate in 1. Bishop e2 defends. This drops the rook. What might have been something better? Well, bishop e2 is best. Kind of have to go for that. It's the only way to defend. What would happen on king c1? Well, rook to d8. What are you doing about this knight? So bishop e2, the apparent best. There goes the rook. There goes black's knight. Getting the last piece involved. This is a passed pawn. Mate is threatened on d1. How to cope with that? b4, providing a flight square, but now in comes queen e1. It's a very nice move. Not cashing out here, grabbing some material. There's more that black can get in this position. One might think, why not go in for that and then push with e3, but this would allow a check and then another check, and he's scooped up. So instead it's queen e1, still trying to put some kind of an attack against that white king. Queen takes a, queen takes b with check. King c1, another check, another check. It's now a really bad position. What do you do? King here is mate. And, well, king here, that's mate. So you have to block. And now the big question is, do you take the knight or do you take the bishop? You definitely take the bishop. You don't want him glued into that b5 square. So you go after the bishop. And as soon as he's gone, this is a really, really sad knight here. What's tried is knight c3. There goes another pawn. And after e3, black is reminding white that he's not only up material, but he has this passed pawn and very poor king position. It's at this point that short he resigns again. It's I don't know. This really turned out to be a beating and a half of an exhibition, I must say. It was really incredible, and we're not even finished yet. There's 2 more games. That was game 8. 2 games remaining. It was just really amazing stuff to see. Let's see this 9th game. We're almost there. We have Kasparov on the white end, starting out with e4. We have a King's Indian attack in this one. Really neat mix of openings in this series. I really enjoyed this. Bishop e2. This was an interesting game. Another attacking game. Every game was an attacking game somehow. At some stage in many of the games, it starts out positional, but then some type of dynamism is injected into the position, and it just gets really, really crazy. A lot of fun to watch for the spectators, for sure. We have white building in the center. The battle lines are drawn. White's heading in this direction, playing where they have space. This pawn on e5. Black, this is where they have space over here on the queen side, and that's where they will be looking to play. Starting with c4 here, and now b5. This is the direction black is going in. White should be looking to attack the black king, and this is the start of it. Knight g4, a4, a3, not allowing the a3 break. Allowing a3 makes this pawn flinch, and then he starts to become a bit vulnerable. The whole structure starts to become vulnerable. So a3 stops this idea right away, secures c3, d4 is secure as a result, and e5 is all the more secure. Not only are the pieces there, but this structure is now really, really strong for as long as you're not allowing that a3 break to happen. B takes c, you pretty much have to do that. Playing b3, that's not the direction to go in. Black needs to open the queen side, so b takes c, b takes, getting to an open file, giving up a pawn, but trying to get some play on the queen side. White takes that pawn offer. Queen a8 avoids the queen exchange. White is looking for blood here, going after the black king. h5, the knight is now kicked to e3. He really wants to get back to that g4 square. Black doubles, g4 on board. This is opening up that g4 square, trying to eliminate that pawn and then get right back in here. And on top of that, it's the g file that now will open up. H takes g, knight takes. Rook moves up so that the queen can now come over here to defend. We'll soon see that. Rook g1, queen here. This is the idea that white has as soon as the rook plays to g1. Knight to h6. If, let's say, knight b3 at this stage, knight h6, and what do? If you go here, you're dropping this pawn. King h8 drops the pawn, and if you go here, well, this is inviting the most powerful piece in the position. Mate threat here, mate threat on g8, and also looking to just smash through on g7. So black comes over to defend in order to meet knight h6 with king to h8. This would prevent white from entering queen h7. But as we can see, there's just going to be still something, no matter what black does here. Already a +2 in climbing. Bishop g5, top move. Rook b2, queen c1. It just continues to climb, and white just absolutely pounces on the black position. Bishop h6, there's a ton of winning moves. +7 and smashing right through. You cannot take that bishop. There's absolutely no way. It's mate in 2, knight f6. King here, that's mate. So white pieces are just circling the black king, inching closer and closer, smashing through on f7. Look out, e6. e6 is falling. And now it looks as if black queenside castled, but instead it was just a very long and painful march all the way over to that b8 square. There's no defense here. +4 always, at least, and giving up the queen, but there's just no hope. After rook g1, there's just nothing to do. One idea to try and have this, a mate in 1 threat, well, there goes your rook. So, in exchanging rooks, these two are just deadly. And don't forget that he's passed and 3 squares away from queening. So, with that, we enter the final game, the 10th game. Many spectators, I imagine, rooting for short to try and stop the bleeding, maybe come away with at least a draw, but that did not happen. Let's see, the final decisive game here. Short on the white end, going with the Tory attack. Let's see how this one plays out. Black eventually hunts down this bishop. Yeah, at this point right here, after c3, we have g5, knight h5. And one little instructive point here is the moment. When exactly to take that bishop? Well, not right away. There's a little bit of a waiting game going on here. Why not take the bishop? Well, it's opening up the rook. Maybe you take on this square only after castles. That's really the train of thought that's going on at this point here. You could take at this stage here, but instead more development. He's not going anywhere. It's usually the case that the bishop will be pinning the knight, but in some sense it's kind of like the knight is pinning the bishop. He's really a piece that can't move in this current position, whereas the knight has options. So, trying to grab some queenside space is white with a4. Here comes f5. And this is reminding white that, well, you know what, I might not just want to take your bishop, but maybe even trap your bishop in some instances. Knight e1. Pressure on that knight. He's still not committing, getting another piece involved, making way for the bishop to develop as well. And there might be ideas of queenside castle. One other idea that white had with a4 is, well, if black is playing these moves here, does he really want to go with kingside castle? If he's going queenside, white is that much closer to creating some pawn tension and opening up the queen side of the board. In the game, we didn't have that. The king ends up residing on the king side. f4 is on board. Only then does the knight capture the bishop. He was quite possibly ready to run away, although, you know what, that would drop the f4 pawn. But it is at this moment, knight takes, bishop is on board. Pawn takes, black castles, and now e4, trying to open up the position. But it is black who has the bishop pair. Need to be careful here, for sure. We have c5 striking at the center. Looking to open up the position is really both sides. It's quite interesting to see that. e4, and now black is insisting, no, I'm going to open up the position even further, striking at d4. Keep in mind, it's this guy here who's the unopposed bishop, dark square bishop. If d4 is a square that the bishop can make use of at some stage, this is a deadly threat. The king forced to this side of the board, and don't forget about this square here. A queen could very easily sneak over and deliver that final blow to the white king there, giving checkmate. So white takes here, not allowing this sequence of moves, this capture, because then that's an accessible point for that bishop at some stage. So it's instead d takes c, and not the recapture, but instead black bypasses that pawn with d5, striking at e4 and making way for the queen to capture that pawn with check. This is a very nice sequence of moves here. c5 takes d5. We have e takes f, queen takes pawn first with check, only then recapturing. This is now a beautiful square for a knight to jump into. Don't forget about g4 either. Two fantastic jumping points for that black knight. Computer does like the black side here. Queen e3, really deep in the white position here, hitting at g3, keeping pressure on f4, keeping pressure on everything. This knight, not a great piece at all. Queen f3, offering a queen exchange. Really cool move. Queen e8, avoiding the queen exchange, having ideas of queen to h5, knight g4, and then queen to h5. Knight c2, looking to regroup, eyeing up that d4 square, looking to get that final piece involved, but now comes knight g4, threatening a mate in 1-2. King g1, queen h5, rook e1. On queen h2, the king simply sneaks over. Black does not go in for that right away. Instead develops a little bit, needs more firepower. Going right in for queen h2, queen h1, king e2. How do you really get at the king? Black is recognizing he needs more material, more firepower on board. Bishop d7, queen takes pawn with check. Black is giving up a pawn with check and now a bishop. But now here comes the queen. Queen h2, queen soon to make use of the h1 square, but first getting another piece involved, skewering the queen and the bishop. Queen picks up a pawn. This bishop can be taken, but now here comes queen takes g3, not even bothering to pick up the bishop, instead grabbing on g3, threatening mate on f2. f4 is hit. This is completely dead. -5 and climbing. Rook e2. There goes the bishop. Knight c5, another pawn is taken with check, queen g3 check, king f1. It's just a constant punch being thrown at white, and he's having to react to all these different threats. Queen h1 was being threatened. No time for knight takes rook. Queen h1, game over. g3, rook takes, and there's absolutely nothing to do. There was a mate threat on g7. It's defended. Knight takes bishop. How do you recapture? Well, there's only one way to recapture the knight, but you just don't even recapture. This knight, he's of no bother to black. Instead, knight h2. The computer's already reading out a mate in 10. King e1. There's already discovered checks in the air. What's played is knight f3 check, king f2, rook discovered check, queen f4 check, king d3, and this 10-game series, this 10-game exhibition ends with a cool knight e5, nice centralization of the knight, double check, and that's mate. I'm really out of words for this kind of play. I've really never witnessed that kind of, I don't know what you would want to call it. Feel free to fill in the blank. What just went on here? It's really incredible. This finished up after these 2 days, playing rapid time control, and 2 games at rapid, 8 games at blitz. It finished up 8.5 to 1.5. The half game draw from game 1 was one that was just a save, like a really good save. There was a lot of pressure on Nigel in game 1, and he managed to draw that game. The other game was a loss on time by Kasparov. He was doing well in that game, the game that he lost on time, and then we have all other 8 games where it's just really amazing stuff. I just don't know what more to add, really. Feel free to share what your thoughts are on this exhibition, this Battle of the Legends. This is, again, regarded as the first Battle of the Legends. What might the second Battle of the Legends be, if there's even going to be something like that? A question to you is, which two legends would you like to see battling it out if there is a second Battle of the Legends? Feel free to leave any feedback in the comment section below. I hope you enjoyed me covering these 10 games. I had fun doing this and watching it live as well. So that's all for this video. As always, I hope you got something out of it. Take care.